Well, it is so good to have a full house this morning. Welcome to this new program here, team. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like we live in a time that tells us that we are supposed to manage everything ourselves. It tells us that we must carry our own burdens. We have to solve our own problems, make our own way. We have to be strong enough, prepared enough, successful enough, and independent enough that you never have to ask for help. We are told that needing help is weakness and that uncertainty is failure. We are told that if we have planned carefully enough or worked hard enough to prepare, we should be able to keep the storms at a manageable distance. But my friends, the gospel tells a different story. In our gospel reading today, the disciples are made to get in a boat and sent out into uncertain waters. Soon the wind rises and the sea becomes rough. It's not exactly smooth sailing through the night. And if you've ever found yourself on a rocking ship, it is very easy to get afraid. But when that storm rolls in, the disciples realize they are not self-sufficient, but rather they discover they are in need of something external to themselves. And it is in this precise moment that Christ comes toward them. So Peter gets out of the boat, he begins to sink, and he realizes he cannot save himself. He cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches out his hand. Beloved, the Christian life is not the story of people who learn how to do everything alone. No, it is the story of people who learn to recognize the presence of Christ and to receive one another's help, even in the midst of a storm. That is something for us to take heart with this morning as we begin a new school year. It is something for the children and educators who are carrying backpacks into new classrooms and new routines. And it is also a word for us as a congregation as we begin this new chapter together. The promise of the gospel is not that we will never face uncertainty. It isn't that every journey will be easy or that every wind will always be gentle. It is simply the promise that we do not go anywhere alone. One of the unsettling details in the story for me today is that Jesus is the one who sends the disciples into the boat to begin with. Matthew tells us that Jesus made them get into the boat and go ahead onto the other side so that he could go on ahead a while he dismissed the crowds and went up to the mountain to pray. This is a common reoccurring motif. The disciples in the storm are not in trouble because they have somehow disobeyed the Lord. They are not in that storm because they have taken some wrong turn. No, they are in the midst of that storm because Jesus sent them there. And still the wind rises. I make this point this morning because we assume often that when things become difficult, it must mean that we have somehow failed. If the waters of our choices are rough, perhaps we have chosen poorly. If our future is uncertain, perhaps we are not faithful enough. If a new beginning is harder than what we expected, perhaps we must have misunderstood God's call. But my friends, sometimes we are exactly where we have been sent, and the waters are still rough. Beloved, faithfulness does not always guarantee calm waters. That is true of our individual lives. That is true of our familial lives. It's true in our schools and our workplaces. And it's most certainly true in the life of this congregation. We can be doing our best, trying to be faithful, showing up and praying and doing the work we've been called to do. And yet we can do all of that and still find ourselves exhausted, anxious, and unsure of what comes next. The good news of the gospel is not that following Jesus will keep us out of every storm. The good news is that regardless of whatever storm we find ourselves, Christ comes to us in the midst of it. And the disciples are no different, because when they see Christ coming towards them, they are frightened and think it's a ghost. Because so often fear changes what we see. It changes our perception. They see Jesus, but they don't recognize him. The very presence of Christ coming towards them in their distress appears to be one more thing to fear. This happens to us too. Fear and scarcity has a way of shaping our perception. It can cause us to mistake help for danger or the unfamiliar presence of God for something threatening. And to those scenarios, Jesus speaks to us and to them and says, "Take heart. Do not be afraid." He doesn't take time to explain the storm. He doesn't tell them why the wind is blowing or even how long the storm will last. He simply shows up and gives himself his presence. My friends, the promise is that the storm simply doesn't stop. The promise we are given is that Christ is present in that storm with us. The disciples come to know who Jesus is, not because they have somehow become fearless or self-sufficient, but because they encounter his presence amidst the storm. This is important for us as a congregation and assembled body this morning. We are not called to become a community of people who never doubt. We are called to become a community that knows where to turn when we do. We are called to be a people who say to one another, "Take heart." We are called to notice when our siblings are struggling in the storm. We are called to reach out when someone begins to sink. We are called to remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but courage most often looks like the decision to keep listening for the voice of Christ in the middle of it. That is the one reason this gospel speaks so powerfully at the beginning of a new school year. In a moment this morning, we will bring backpacks and bodies to this altar. These backpacks are seemingly ordinary objects. Yet a backpack says, "I am going somewhere, and I am preparing for something I have not yet experienced." And it reminds us, too, that we cannot carry everything by ourselves. A backpack may hold books and school supplies, yes, but the young people who are carrying those backpacks may also be carrying hopes and worries and a whole other host of emotions as they begin a new year. They may be entering a new classroom, a new school, or a new set of relationships, or a new grade. They may be wondering to themselves whether they will fit in, whether they will succeed, whether they will be brave enough to face what comes next. Backpacks, however, reminds us that they, along with us, are always carrying something, and that we are not meant to carry those things alone. Students beginning a new year do not go at it alone. The educators and support staff do not go alone. Parents, guardians, and caregivers do not go alone. And my friends, this congregation does not go alone. Sure, there will be days when the water is calm, and there will be days when the wind rises and almost knocks us over. There will be moments of confidence and moments when someone begins to sink. But Christ is present. So therefore, we are called to be present with one another. As I begin this ministry among you, I do not stand before you as someone who knows how to walk on water. Yet, I sometimes wish I could. I do not have a map that eliminates every uncertainty or a plan that guarantees calm sea. I simply stand before you as someone who stands with you among the disciples. Sometimes courageous, sometimes afraid, but always dependent on that hand of Christ reaching out for me. Because that is where we all stand. So this week, as we begin the new school year and begin a new programmatic year in the life of this congregation, let us remember what we have been reminded of this morning in our gospel text. We are reminded that new beginnings can be joyful, and they can also be difficult. That the journey may include rough waters. That fear doesn't mean that we have failed or that asking for help is weakness. May we remember that the prayer, Lord, save me, is a faithful prayer in and of itself. And we are being reminded that none of us go at this life alone. Beloved, when the waters are calm, Christ is with us. When the wind rises and the tide has come in and the water is rough, Christ is with us. When we step out in courage, Christ is with us. And when we begin to sink, Christ is with us. And when we gather again in worship, we discover often that we have been carried not by our own strength, but by the steadfast presence of God. We do not follow Jesus because we will never be afraid or we will never sink. We follow Jesus into the storm because Christ comes to us, speaks to us, and reaches out to us and says, "Take heart. Do not be afraid." Amen.